Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. We're actually going to skip our usual intro today because, well, the global economy is going through an absolutely massive, unprecedented shock right now, and we really need to unpack it immediately. The situation in the Middle East has rapidly spiraled into a full-blown global economic crisis. To really grasp where we're heading, we've got to look directly at the data. Okay, let's dive right into this. 13 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. That staggering figure represents the barrels of crude oil that are literally wiped off the global market every single day right now, all because of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz. We're dealing with an incredibly severe disruption to the absolute lifeblood of global logistics and energy. And listen, this is not just some normal market fluctuation. According to the experts over at the Atlantic Council, what we're experiencing is a gigantic, sustained disruption that threatens global economic stability on a scale actually exceeding the infamous 1973 oil crisis. I mean, we are truly in uncharted waters here. Moving on to Section 1, the Strait of Hormuz shock, the epicenter of the crisis. Now, to understand why this matters to your daily life, we really have to look at the sheer scale of this choke point. The Middle East produces nearly a third, about 30%, of the entire world's oil supply. It's like a giant artery. When a physical blockade happens at the Strait of Hormuz, it instantly severs that artery, sending unavoidable shockwaves rippling out into literally every single economy on the planet. You know, we often hear people comparing this to the 1973 oil embargo, but what's really interesting about this slide is how jarring the contrast actually is. Back in 73, we saw a 7% supply loss that was, at its core, a political decision. It was reversible with just a stroke of a pen. But today, we're facing a 13% supply loss driven by actual physical blockades and severely damaged infrastructure. You can't just fix that with a signature. It's going to take months, maybe even years, to repair the whole shebang. And because of that, the resulting market panic is just undeniable. Since late 2025, oil prices have surged by a massive 84%. And since a huge chunk of the global liquefied natural gas supply transits that exact same strait, European gas prices have spiked by an astounding 98%. This acts as an enormous, immediate tax on the global economy, violently draining purchasing power from businesses and from us, the consumers. Which brings us to Section 2, Asia's resilience tested, the Eastern Ripple. So where does this massive shockwave hit first? Asia. Asia consumes a massive 38% of the world's oil. But their critical vulnerability, their Achilles heel really, is that they import the vast majority of it. They are the absolute engine of global growth, but they don't produce the fuel. That leaves them incredibly exposed when the taps in the Middle East suddenly dry up. And it's not just crude oil we're talking about. A staggering 80% of the liquefied natural gas exported through the Strait of Hormuz is bought specifically by Asian markets. When those ships stop sailing, it delivers a direct, immediate shock to Asian refiners, utilities, and factories. The very power grids that supply the world's consumer goods are quite literally starved of energy. To really grasp what this does to an economy under the hood, we need to look at a concept called terms of trade. Basically, this is the ratio between what a country earns from its exports and what it pays for its imports. When you're a net energy importer and energy prices skyrocket by 84%, your terms of trade violently worsen. It literally transfers domestic wealth right out of Asian economies and straight into the pockets of the remaining fossil fuel exporters. We can actually see the real-world impact of this wealth transfer in the latest IMF projections for Asia. Take a look. Growth is dragging down from a robust 5% in 2025 to a projected 4.4% this year. And at the exact same time, inflation is nearly doubling, jumping from 1.4% all the way to 2.6%. The global growth engine is basically being forced to hit the brakes while running dangerously hot. Let's move over and see how this builds in Section 3. Europe's inflation rebound, the Western Ripple. As this shockwave travels west, the economic realities are equally stark. Impartially looking at this European Central Bank data, we see a highly fragile picture. Economic growth in the euro area is completely stunted, projected to fall to just 0.9% this year. Meanwhile, headline inflation is rebounding back up to 2.6%, squarely due to the energy price spikes from the conflict. Now, the crucial point here is understanding exactly why Europe is hurting quite so much. Europe is the world's absolute top consumer of diesel fuel, far outpacing China and the US. And here's the kicker: the heavy crude from the Middle East is the ideal feedstock for refining diesel.
By losing that specific, critical supply, Europe's entire trucking and supply chain network is uniquely, deeply vulnerable.
Which brings us to Section 4, the global policy dilemma, the bitter medicine. This incredibly intense situation brings governments worldwide to a super critical crossroads. How do you keep your economy afloat when the physical energy simply isn't there? Well, we're seeing two main policy responses emerge. On one hand, you have subsidies. They're politically popular, sure, and they offer immediate relief, but they artificially boost demand when there's zero supply. On the other hand, you have rationing. It's intensely unpopular, but it reflects reality and actually preserves critical supply for the things that really matter. So, whether it happens through sky-high prices or direct government mandates, we are facing an unavoidable economic reality called demand destruction. And this isn't just some temporary dip in shopping, right? It's a persistent downward shift where a total lack of supply forces painful, long-term behavioral changes from all of us. You stop taking that road trip. You stop running the factory. The demand is quite literally destroyed. All right, moving to Section 5, subsidies versus rationing, managing a prolonged crisis. So how in the world should we manage a prolonged crisis of this massive magnitude? Both the Atlantic Council and the IMF issue a really stark warning here about the hidden danger of subsidies. Subsidizing the price of gas basically mutes the vital price signals that tell consumers, hey, maybe drive less. It forestalls necessary demand reduction and rapidly drains national reserves. Essentially, handing out subsidies is a massive gamble that the war ends tomorrow. And if it doesn't, they risk catastrophic physical shortages later in the year. Instead, experts are actually suggesting a phased rollout of physical rationing. This takes those complex macroeconomic theories and turns them into tangible daily realities for Main Street. Step 1, protect the essentials, like critical food production and logistics. Step 2, mandate work from home for all possible office workers to just instantly save on commute fuel. And Step 3, structurally curtail discretionary non-essential travel. The Atlantic Council explicitly noted things like taking RV vacations as prime targets for immediate reduction. Wild, right? And it goes way beyond just changing our consumer habits. We're looking at major emergency structural reforms. For instance, in the U.S., there are growing calls to suspend the centuries-old Jones Act. This act heavily restricts domestic shipping and forces a massive reliance on highly inefficient heavy-duty trucks. Suspending it could drastically reduce national diesel reliance. Basically, governments are going to have to cut deeply into entrenched regulations just to save fuel. Which leaves us with this final, incredibly vital thought to take away from today's explainer. As this historic shock completely reshapes our world, policymakers and citizens alike have to confront an unavoidable, hard reality. The supply simply is not there. So the huge question is, will we make the difficult, painful choice to ration oil today or ignore the warning signals and pay a much, much steeper price tomorrow? Really think about your own energy footprint, because the global economy is about to make you confront it whether you want to or not. Thank you so much for joining me today, and keep learning.